on the clock, and today is a special episode. It's kind of close to my heart. It's been 17 years since my dad passed away on October 12th, 2004. And to be honest with you, I remember it like it was yesterday. So please subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and make sure you click on that bell so that you know anytime I do something, you'll get the notifications. Now, I know I haven't put up a lot of videos, but for me, doing the videos it's okay, but I like streaming more than putting up videos. But this one had to be done because I wanted to do a dedication to my father since I'm on YouTube. So I'm just going to give you guys some of the details of what happened to me and how basically this part of my life is one of the biggest regrets that I have and that I've ever had in my life. So the story starts off. It's basically 5 days before my dad passed away, and he went to the bathroom and, well, he was shitting blood. My mom and him were not kind of speaking at the time. So my dad got up and went to the bathroom, had the incident, and then started to take a shower. So my mom was like, why is he taking a shower? What's he doing? So she got dressed. She hid under the covers. He got out the shower, he got dressed, and he left. She followed him. My mom got up, followed him right up the road. We were going to the hospital. It wasn't that far from my house. But on the way to the hospital, my dad passed out. Now, my mom was telling me all these details because I wasn't there. I'll explain where I was later on in the story. But he passed out. So I don't know if she had caught up to him before he passed out, or if she caught up to him like right as he passed out or whatever. But I guess she was panicking, screaming, whatever. And there was a taxi driver that drove by. He had a fare. He dropped his fare and then came back to pick up my dad to take my dad to the hospital. Now, I know it probably wasn't that far. They weren't that far from the hospital, but the fact that he did that showed the kind of character that this taxi man had, and I will always respect him for that, even though I have no idea who he is. So, it's like a Friday night, and I'm at Blockbuster. This is where I am. Blockbuster is not far from my house, not even far from the hospital. But I'm at Blockbuster, I'm getting some games, I'm getting some movies, and I get a phone call. So my son's mother calls me and she's like, your father's in the hospital. So I'm like, my father's in the hospital for what? And she's like, well, the same thing that happened last year. And just a little bit of more details. The year before that, same thing happened. My dad went to the bathroom, he shit blood, he went to the hospital. But they kept him overnight and they let him go. They didn't find anything with him. So for me, I was like, oh man, really? Like, I'm just thinking my night is ruined, but I'm also thinking that he's going to be okay. You know what I mean? He's going to go there. They're going to let him go in the morning. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go over there. So I'm at Blockbuster. Blockbuster's like right across the street from the hospital. So I go over to the hospital. I put my movies back. I put the games back and I go. Now, when I get there, my mom is already in the registration room. And as I get closer to her, I see my mom is shaking. Like she is shaking like I've never seen her before in my life. So I'm getting a little worried. So I walk up and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And she's like, oh my God, your father, your father, your father. So I'm like, what? And then the registration nurse comes back and she's like, do you have your father's hospital card? And my mom's digging through her purses and her hands are shaking. And I'm like, she's like, Ansel, I don't have the card. I don't have the card. You got to go home and get your father's hospital card. So I'm like, hold on, mom, just relax. And I asked the nurse, I'm like, listen, my dad was here last year. I guess for the same problem. So you must have a record. So she goes, she looks, she sees his record. She gives him a hospital card. Now at this time, the orderlies come in and they have a bag, a plastic bag. So they come and they drop it beside us. So I'm like, what's this? And my mom's like, it's your father's clothes. So I'm like, okay. So I go to pick up the clothes and I'm like, holy cow, like, what the fuck? This is so heavy. And she's like, yeah, well, he's bled. He bled. So I'm like, okay, well, what's going on? She's like, I'll handle this. Just take the clothes home. You know what I mean? And do whatever. So I'm like, okay, but like, what's going on? She's like, I got this. So I said, okay. So I go home, you know what I mean? And I carry the clothes home. I go home, I put them in the bathtub, and they are full of blood, man. Like I couldn't believe it. So what happened was my mom told me later on that when my dad got to the hospital, they put him in a wheelchair, and he was telling her that he had to go to the bathroom. And my mom's like, "Oh, just go right there, just go in the chair." So he went in the chair, but when he did, it was nothing but blood. So they took him, boom, right away, like right away. They took him. So I'm home and I'm lying in bed. I go to sleep. When I got home, it was like maybe midnight, because I chilled in the hospital for a bit, but it was like midnight. So I fall asleep. So my phone rings, while I'm sleeping. And I know it was late, but I was still in a sleep. So it's like you hear your phone, but it's like, oh, okay, whatever. So I just ignore it and fall back asleep. And then it rings again, right away again. So it took me a while to register because I was still sleeping. And then I wake up like right out of my sleep and I'm like, oh shit, my dad. So I pick up the phone and my mom's like, Anzo, can you bring me a sweater? It's cold here. I'm like, Mom, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. She's like, yeah, I know, I'm cold. So I'm like, okay, but the hospital has blankets. And she's like, your father had a stroke. So I'm like, oh shit. So I get up real quick, I get dressed and I fly up to the hospital. So when I get there now, they have him in the emergency room, right? And he's in stretcher, and he's just lying there and he's up. So I'm like, hey dad, how you doing? And I could look at his face and you could see that like he had a stroke. So he's trying to talk and my mom wasn't really understanding what he was saying, but I understood. And, I stayed there for a bit and my mom was like, okay, thank you for bringing me my sweater. You can go back. And I'm like, yeah, I'll stay for a bit. So I stay for a bit and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go home. My mom's like, okay, I'm going to stay up here with him. Like, no problem. So when I'm leaving, my father says to me, don't worry, I'll be okay. And those were the last words he ever spoke to me, to be honest with you. Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. So, anyways, I go home, I go to sleep. As soon as I wake up in the morning, I go to the hospital. And now I go to the hospital, we're in the room and my mom's there. And I'm like, hey, dad, how you doing? Everything okay? But he's not really responding. So my mom tells me that he had like 3 different strokes during the night. So I'm like, wow, this is like getting real. So that whole day, I didn't go to work and I'm just going, no, it was a Saturday, I think. So I didn't have to work, but I'm just going back and forth to the hospital all day, back and forth. My mom's just telling me, don't worry, I got this. Go take care of your son, go deal with your girlfriend, my son's mother, and, cook, do the things you have to do. I got this. And my dad was supposed to have a test from the night he got there. They were supposed to take him to do a test, and he never had that test. So the night goes off, I go home, I sleep, wake up in the morning, I do the same things day 2. Now, day 2, I go to the hospital and my dad is getting worse. My mom is like holding his hand and she's saying, squeeze my hand, squeeze my hand. And my dad could squeeze her hand. He could see us. He could, communicate with his hands or whatever, but he can't talk. So, again, back and forth to the hospital, back and forth to the hospital all day and like getting worried. My son's mother's like, don't worry, your father's going to be okay. He's going to pull through. He's going to pull through. And every time I go to the hospital, I'm like, Mom, did you have the test? No, he didn't have the test yet. Mom, did you have the test? No, he didn't have the test yet. I mean, I've been to that hospital more in those 5 days than I've ever been in my life. So the next day, sorry, let me go back a bit. That night, me and my son's mother were talking about my son. And we're like, do we bring my son to the hospital to see my dad? And we ended up deciding, yes, we're going to do it because I could see he's getting worse. She's optimistic and she's like, don't worry, he's going to get better. He's going to get better. But I'm like, well, what if he doesn't? I think we need to bring Raheem up there. And Raheem and my dad, that was, he was, he was my son's father. Like, that's how my dad treated him. My dad treated this kid like he was everything in the world to him. So we brought my dad back up on the third day, and my dad still could, recognize and communicate with his hands. So we're in the hospital and we're like, cracking jokes. My son's not really understanding what goes on. He's like 6 years old, but he's like, Grandpa, Grandpa. And my dad is kind of smiling, and then he dropped a tear, and I could just imagine what it was like, your family is there and you can't communicate with them. You can't say hi and you can't talk to your grandson. You know, it hurt. It was the worst thing, one of the worst things that I've ever experienced, that and my mom's death. So we take him home, at least my dad got to see Raheem. But at this time, I'm like, Mom, you need to go home and take a shower. You know what I mean? Maybe eat something. You've been in this hospital since day one. She never left his side since day one. And at this point, my mom's sisters were coming around and they haven't really spoke to my mom in years because my dad and them didn't get along. But they were there. They came. They showed support to my mom. So my mom goes home and she goes home, she takes a shower and does her thing. She comes back up and I do my thing, and we're there chilling. Yeah, my son's mother go home and we take care of our son. I think my son was with his aunt when we were up there or something like that. I don't really remember that part, but you know. So then go up there on the fourth day and now my dad's not responsive at all. Like he can't even communicate. The only thing is he could hear us because my mom kept telling him, squeeze my hand. That's what the nurses kept saying. Kept saying, Mr. Hodges, squeeze our hand, squeeze our hand. So my mom kept doing that. Hodge, squeeze my hand, squeeze my hand. And he was still doing it, but you could see that there was really not much power left in there, and he was just like he was struggling to squeeze her hand. So that day, I tell my mom, I'm like, listen, Mom, go home, get some rest. I am going to stay up here. So she goes home, and I'm there. My son's mother comes up, and the nurse comes in, and and she takes her flashlight, and she looks in his eyes. She opens his eyes up, and she looks in his eyes with the flashlight, and there was no response. He had no response whatsoever. It was like he didn't even know that someone was flashing a light in his eyes. That's the moment I knew that, he's not going to get better. So, by this time, family is coming up, and I call one of my friends, I haven't speak to in a long time. Like me and him were basically arguing or whatever, and call him up and I'm like, yo, my dad's in the hospital, and he's like, oh shit. He's like, okay, I'm gonna come check you. So he comes up to the hospital and his name's Balau, really good guy. And he comes in and he's like, all concerned, and he asked my mom, he's like, can I pray for him? My mom's like, yeah, sure. And just the fact that he, out of respect, asked, so we let him pray. So, yeah, I think this was during the day, and later on that night, I go home, whatever, and I come back and they're taking him for his test, you know. So I'm sitting there. It's me, my mom, my son's mother, and her two sisters. So we're just waiting. We're just waiting for the results, you know. So they come and they bring him back to the room, and the doctor comes up to us and he's like, "Oh, well, his brain filled up with fluid. Well, his head filled up with fluid, and it crushed his brain." So we're like, okay, is he going to be okay? Tell us. And the doctor wanted to like look like but we're like, "Doc, just tell us the truth." And he was like, "I'm sorry." And my mom broke down. She just lost it, which made me lose it, which made my son's mother lose it. And then the sisters lost it. So, we're trying to deal with this and it's hard. I go home with my son's mother. My mom's still up there with the sisters. And we do what we have to do. We try to live our life, but it's really hard for me. By this time, I had went to work and I told them, like, listen, my dad's in the hospital. I won't be back for a while. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around the situation that is going on. So the next morning, we go to the hospital and I go to the emergency room where he was, and he's not there. So I'm freaking out. My son's mother was like, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. It's okay, don't cry, don't cry. So I'm like, nurse, where's Mr. Hodges? I was here, And she's like, oh, well, he went upstairs to room so and so. So I'm like, okay. So we go up the stairs and I'm like rushing. And she's like, don't worry. They probably just put him in a room to get better. Don't worry, don't worry. When in all reality, they put him in that room to die. So I go up the stairs, and the way the hospital is, that they have the doors, but on the side of the doors, they have a window pane, So when I go up to the second, because you go up one flight and then you go wrap around and go up the next flight to the second floor. And as I get up and I look through that window pane, I could see directly into the room. And my dad was what I seen. And I broke down because I dreamt about that. I had a dream about that. And, I never remember the dream until the situation happens. And then when it happens, I'm like, holy fuck, I dreamt about this. Like, I seen this before. So we go up there and, he's in the room and he's breathing really lightly. Like, you could tell he's struggling to breathe. And we're there. I kiss him on his forehead. I tell him he can go. He doesn't have to hold on for us. We will be strong and we will get through it, And I go aside and I'm crying. My mom is still crying, like she's trying to hold it together. But my parents were together for like 40 years. My dad was all she knew. He really was all she knew. So my brother comes up, my sisters come up, they're all in the room, we're all talking, we're all, surrounding him just with love, just love, because nobody wanted him to be alone when he passed away. So I go home, I'm cooking and trying to live my life. And then my mom calls and says he took his last. My mom calls and says he took his last breath. So I go back up into the hospital. And just her alone, just her demeanor, just the way she was crying and broke my heart, you know. And why I say one of the biggest regrets I have is because the first day, from the first day that my dad was in that hospital, he was supposed to have a test. And I just listened to my mom. She was just like, go home, don't worry, I got it. And even though I asked every time, like, did he have his test? Did he have his test? I should have went to jail for fighting for him to get that test. I should have fought. I should have yelled. I should have screamed. I should have did whatever it took in that hospital to make sure that he had his tests when he was supposed to. Because till this day, I'm like, maybe if he had the test, they would have caught it and he maybe could have survived. You know, I always try to, it's like things happen for a reason. All these things happen for a reason. And one thing I can honestly say is that him dying before my mom was for a reason. Because if my mom had died first, he wouldn't have been able to survive. I mean, my mom couldn't survive, but she tried her best. But I know my dad, he would have lost it. So now we gotta talk about funeral arrangements, and we found a funeral home. And thanks to my sister, we found a pastor, a reverend that would do the ceremony, do the funeral for us, So we go to the funeral home and my mom can't go in. She breaks down right before she goes in. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I remember this like it was yesterday. So I'm like, Mom, don't worry. I got it. So we go in there and my mom was just quiet, So he's telling us all the prices and casket this and flowers this and flowers that. And I'm the one that's deciding whether we do this or we do that, I'm like, Mom, is that okay? Whatever you want. Mom, is that okay? Whatever you want. So we set it up. Then we have the funeral, And for me, nobody was doing that eulogy for my dad other than me. And I tried to find it because I still have the paper of what I wrote for him somewhere, but I couldn't find it. So I just said, I'll probably do it another time if I do another video. But it was one of the hardest times in my life. And it's 17 years later. And about a week ago, I'm emotional, not realizing the date. I'm just feeling emotional. And I cried, I shed some tears for some reason. And then I realized, no matter what, this date is indebted in me. Even when I'm not thinking about the dates, I get emotional around this time. And it's just like, why? And then I realize October 12th is coming, So I came on YouTube and I've been on here for almost a year. It'll be a year soon that I've been doing YouTube. And I decided that, listen, I'm going to do a dedication to my father. I'm going to do a dedication to my mother when the time comes. I wanted to do for their birthdays, and I didn't. So I'm going to do it now. This is from my dad. And in June, when my mom's time comes, she will get one like this for me too. Because I'm personally, in this world, I'm a nobody. You know what I mean? When I pass away, ain't nobody gonna remember me. But because of YouTube, I'll at least leave some sort of mark in my life. Something where someone can go on YouTube and remember me. And maybe I can help someone along the way. I don't care if I help one person, I care if I help two people. But at least I help somebody. you know, because we all go through problems. We've all had our experience. We've all had these bad things happen to us in our life. And sometimes it's good to know that you are not alone. You know, I wish I had that. So I do appreciate you guys for listening. I do appreciate you guys for checking out my video. I'm going to end this video with a dedication that I've done for my dad. Again, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I really hope you guys enjoy the content that I put out there, you know, even though I don't do a lot, but I try, you know, I try to satisfy the people that watch me. I don't want to say fans because I got fans. I just got people that watch me, you know, but that's another story for another day. But with all that being said, I appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. You know what I mean? Please don't be disrespecting in the comments, man, because I know I've had a few comments where people are disrespecting. And if you want to disrespect me, you can disrespect me, but not on this video, okay? Peace.
Looking through my Bible, searching for a song to sing. Heard a beautiful man that passed away, and I know you wonder why, Lord, you take him from me. See, heaven's the only place that he needs to be, and I know that you never felt pain like you feel today. Please remember this when I say he got a set of wings today. Heard you got your set of wings today. Open them up and fly away. I heard you got your set of wings today. Open them up. The world don't deserve your love no more. The Lord done open up heaven's doors for you. Come on, walk on through. Walk on through, yeah. He's for loving, true and kind. Husband, father, friend of mine. My friends like funny and keeping it real. They both were a part of Mr. Hill. Memories will keep her filled. Got a heart so genuine, so true. And he's smiling down on us now. Said he's smiling down on us now. Got your set of wings today. Yes, he will. Fly away. Heard you got your set of wings today.